our evening is to hear from people who are on boards or have boards in their congregations where they have already adopted the eighth principle and are now beginning to align their policies and practices with the eighth principle. So we thank all of you who agreed to be here this evening. We have, as of today, 125 adoptions of the eighth principle. So you can imagine that there are many congregations that can participate in this conversation. We are hoping to continue gathering some of these policies and practices and compile them so that we can be learning from each other. And in the meantime, though, it's also important to keep in mind that we're all learning, and this is new. So we may be changing some policies and practices, and we might find out down the road, 1, 2, 3 years, that what we put in place today may need to be revised again. So I just want to keep that in mind. It's not like we're going to have all of the answers for the future now, but we are learning and changing as we go. With that, I'd like to invite Bruce to give our opening reading.
Right, this is from James Cone. Indeed, our survival and liberation depend upon our recognition of the truth when it is spoken and lived by the people. If we cannot recognize the truth, then it cannot liberate us from untruth. To know the truth is to appropriate it, for it is not mainly reflection and theory. Truth is divine action entering our lives and creating the human action of liberation.
Thank you, Bruce. Very nice. Okay, well, let's get started. So we've asked each of the people who are presenting to give us one policy or practice from their congregation. They will have somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. 7 will be the ideal spot so that we can move on. We have 8 congregations on our list this evening, and with whatever time we have left, you can engage in questions. It might be helpful if some of those questions go into the chat, knowing that we won't get to them all this evening, but maybe answers can be provided between now and the next session, or certainly by our early hour when we have our open dialogue. So with that, let's begin with, I'm going to start with the smaller congregations and then move to the larger ones. Oh, I forgot to ask, is Jill Rabinoff here?
She's here.
Jill?
Here.
Well, Jill, if you are ready, would you mind going first? And as you do, of course, introduce your name and the name of your congregation and location. And I want to say that you're about to hear from First Unitarian Church in Honolulu. They were the second church to adopt the eighth principle in 2017. So it's a pleasure, Jill, to have you here.
Thank you, Paula. It's all with your support for sure. So I'm Jill Rabinoff, and I'm a member of the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu, and I'm a co-facilitator for the ADORE program, a dialogue on race and ethnicity that Paula got us started on and has mentored us through. And Allison Jacobs, one of the other co-facilitators, is on the board, and she wasn't able to speak today. She says hi to everybody. Due to work reasons, so I'm just filling in for her. So you've asked us to talk about I had so many, we had a conversation this morning with all the justice leaders about different points of how the eighth principle has impacted us, but I'll just share one of the ideas that came out. So Well, the board, I think because of the eighth principle, we were spurred on to really pursue the widening the circle of concern. And throughout the spring, the board presented summaries of each of the widening the circle chapters during Sunday services. And then after the service, there was a discussion on each chapter. So that went on for quite a while, a couple of months. And then now there's a widening the circle study group that has emerged of 7 or 8 people. It's like a study group, and it's kind of turning into a task group, a task force, so to speak. And they're right now working on a mission and what they're going to pursue. And I've been asked to actually ask if any other congregations have established a mission statement. If any other congregations have widening the circle task force, and if they've established mission statements, we'd love to have you share that with us. So I think that's one of the big things we've done inside of our congregation due to the eighth principle, officially adopting the eighth principle.
Thank you, Jill. So you all are planning to go back and revisit your mission statement in light of what you've learned so far, right?
Well, Allison actually sent me this morning the draft of it. It's not, I don't think it's completed, but I'm happy to read what she sent me as far as what they've accomplished so far. If
Sure.
do you want me to do that? Okay,
Yes.
it's just a draft. It's not completed. Okay, it's a rough draft, she says. So we, the Widening the Circle of Concern inclusion team, as inspired by the eighth principle, to increase congregational awareness and support of and engagement with the eighth principle, develop leadership training, and then it has parentheses for whom, for what purpose, based on what, and then curate resources for young parents, parents of young children, why not parents in general, what kind of resources for what purpose, to supplement RE. These are all question marks because this is a rough draft for all levels of knowledge. So that's a very, very rough, rough draft. And I think this task force is trying to get ideas from other congregations if they have engaged in widening the circle task force and a mission, creating a mission. They would like to get more ideas. So thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Jill. Next, we will hear from White Plains. Joe,
Thank you.
are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you, Paula. White Plains is a suburb in the New York City area. We have 185 members in our congregation.
You have to tell us who you are.
I'm getting to, yes, I'm the board chair.
Okay.
I'm going to give you one example of an initiative that we did, and I'll stop with that. And here's the strategy behind what we chose to do. We wanted to implement an action that would have the most comprehensive impact throughout the entire congregation. We felt the best way to do that would be at the policy level, not at the event level or meal level or brunch level. We wanted to do it at the policy level. So we empowered our committee on ministry, which consists of 6 members, to conduct a survey of the entire congregation on anti-bias. It's called an anti-bias assessment. The study consisted of 2 legs. We sent out an individual survey to all 185 members, and we separately conducted an in-person focus group study of 10 of our most significant committees. And we had, out of 185, we had 70 respondents that participated in the individual survey. But what was really powerful was the sessions with the committees. And so what I will do is I'm going to post in the chat, I'm going to post the link to the questions that we used. And what we did was these 5 questions are the same questions we used for the individual survey and for the work that we did in the focus groups. And based upon the feedback from those surveys, the Committee on Ministry delivered a comprehensive report, and it came up with 4 recommendations. And I'm going to give you the highlights of those recommendations. So the first recommendation was to establish or continue an 8th Principal Committee that would keep the topic of racial bias in front of the congregation by engaging outside speakers and providing educational opportunities for the congregation on an ongoing basis. Continue to pursue diversity both within the congregation and in congregational activities, and by developing relationships with groups outside of our congregation. That 8th Principal Committee would assume responsibility for ongoing dialogue in the subject and services, coffee hour, religious education, and would also help conduct regular evaluations and reflection as how we recognize and address racial bias as individuals, as groups and committees, and as a congregation. Second recommendation was to support the Committee on Ministry on establishing policies and procedures for addressing conflicts around racial justice. So not only did the Committee on Ministry do the work of designing and conducting the survey, they also continued to keep skin in the game by offering to work on further establishing policies and procedures, which would be a huge assist to the 8th Principal Committee and to the board. The third recommendation was also, I thought, a very significant one that impacted a lot of our committee structure. We have 33 committees at CEUC, which they need to be less, but we have a lot of committees, a lot of individual interests. And so the third recommendation was this: ask each committee to update its mission statement, policies, and practices around education and training for committee members, specifically as it relates to raising awareness of racial justice issues and the manner in which each committee makes a contribution to the work of the congregation in this regard. And then lastly, the final recommendation from the Committee of Ministry was to work with the nominating committee and what we call our path to membership to help them understand and assess possibilities for strengthening anti-racist work. So what happened next? The board received those recommendations from the Committee on Ministry. We assessed it. The only tweak that the board made was that instead of creating a new 8th Principal Committee, which we had already created to pursue the adoption, we decided to simply turn over responsibility for that role to our racial justice team. Instead of getting into micromanaging how we would form that committee, we just said, look, our resource is really the racial justice team, and it's also a chance to engage more members of the congregation in an inclusive way to get more people with a lot of background in this topic to make a contribution to those recommendations. So we had a follow-up session with 3 people: the board chair, myself, the head of the Committee of Ministry, and with the chair of the racial justice team. And we talked about making this tweak and changing around the role, and everyone came to peace with that. That's what made sense. And I'm happy to announce that the recommendation from the racial justice team on the 4th recommendation, which said work with nominating committee and path to membership, is to consider relying on Jubilee 3 workshops. Instead of having the racial justice team help train and help those individuals do the work of anti-racism, we're going to rely on the Jubilee 3 workshop platform to help do that work. And I'm at work to try to personally extend that to include the members of the board and to have our congregation serve as the sponsor for a Jubilee 3 workshop sometime in the future. So what started with the kernel of an idea with the Committee on Ministry doing an assessment expanded into something that's going to affect 33 committees. It touched every individual in our congregation. And I think it was another really pervasive way to maximize the engagement, maximize the touch of the 8th principle. That's what we did with that 8th principle minute. You know, it was just a reminder. It was a steady drumbeat, and we wouldn't let people forget that we were out there. And it wasn't just a one and done situation. So with that, Paul and Bruce, that's my tip. from White Plains.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe.
You're
And
welcome.
I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to hear or learn more. But that's a great commercial for tonight. Thank you. All right, so next we will hear from Peoples. Brian?
Hello, I should be sure and clarify that I'm actually speaking to the Unitarian Church of Eugene, Oregon, where I'm also a member.
Okay.
Eugene,
And
Oregon,
introduce yourself first because I
Yeah.
didn't get the proper introduction.
yes, Brian Lewis, and I am with the Challenging Racism, Putting Love into Action Committee with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Eugene. And so I'll be saying UUCE a lot. And last time I knew, we had 376 members, but I didn't know to check that. And I am keeping under the 7 minutes, but I didn't quite create the same presentation that you have, but it'll still work good. So first of all, 2014, we returned to a downtown location from a residential location. That was the start of our current focus on anti-racist work. And the reason we say that is because the move itself recognized this need as a pivotal reason to move. Early in the 60s, we moved away from downtown. In terms of ongoing dismantling racism work, 2016 at the new location, which has a great feeder streets, both east and west and north and south, we proudly put the Siding with Love banner. In 2017, our committee Challenging Racism and Putting Love into Action has been very active in working to help the church become aware of and dismantle racism and systemic white privilege in our community, our church, our state, our nation, and everywhere. I plan, after I'm done and others are speaking, to put in some links so that people who have an interest can check out the UUCE program that we've done. We also kept UU Refugee Sanctuary Project. And the reason I mentioned that briefly is because the issue was to respond not just to the issues of need for refugees and immigrants, but also to directly combat hate speech and Islamophobia in 2018 and beyond. Of course, we've always had a presence at the Eugene Pride Festival. I think I will be more specific to your topic, Paula, at this point. In 2019, we began the process to call a settled minister, and we completed that in May of 2021 with the selection of Reverend Jennifer Youngsoon Ryu. We're very happy to have her with us. Our community offering committee changed its process to donate its entire Sunday plate every Sunday in early 2020, so that the entire month's offerings were going to a particular group in our town. Again, more specific to your topic, in June of 2020, our board responded to the Gadfly papers, and their first opening sentence was, on behalf of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Eugene, we, the Board of Trustees, have been prompted to answer the call of love. And I will list the link for the whole entire statement, which is about 1.5 pages long. Of course, we've attended the Black Lives Matter marches and the Martin Luther King marches, but more specifically, in the fall of 2020, the UUCE board adopted the wording of the 8th principle. And we had lots of book groups that were specifically looking at many books. I'll just quickly list. So You Want to Talk About Race, Me and White Supremacy, White Fragility, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And there were others that the book groups were reading. I think I'll skip that for time. In spring of 2021, we hosted 4 Zoom town hall meetings to present the 8th principle to the congregation to prepare for the congregational vote. June 13, 2021, the UUCE formally adopted the 8th principle into its bylaws, adding to the 7 principles listed there previously from 2014. And also, this is a real major investment. At that annual meeting last spring, we added a new position, which is Minister of Pastoral Care and Adult Faith Formation. And that minister is assisting specifically in the prophetic work, call to action, and accountability of the justice work within and beyond our walls. And then sort of finally, I'm real proud of the fact that the UUCE in Eugene, Oregon has the highest participation in the Beloved Conversation series that Meadville Lombard is doing for this fall. And I'm attending that as well. So I guess that's my presentation. I will keep it short, but these are examples of how UUCE has got up and got out to help build the world we dream about, which of course are part of the words from Dr. Takia Amin, who's the current director for Black Lives Matter UU. Thank you so much for letting me present. And like I say, I'll start putting stuff in the chat for people for links.
Okay. Brian, thank you. So you've kind of combined my question with the conversations we were having last year about how the congregation came to vote, and that was fine. In particular, the decision to move the church back to downtown, that's very important. And I think a number of churches have been faced with that decision. So that may be something for us to look at in the future.
Yes, and it was very painful. For me personally, I wasn't quite as developed on the 8th principle. And so I was really hating to move because we had such a beautiful rural location, but I'm very proud of us for being downtown now.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. So next, we'll hear from Brookfield, Wisconsin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeannie Jarecki, and I am on the anti-racism transformation team at Unitarian Universalist in Brookfield, Wisconsin. And we go as UUCW is our little call lines. So I didn't know about the one policy, which we haven't done yet. So I'll just give you a brief background of what we have been doing. We did pass the 8th principle in October of 2020. And then our board formed a charge for the anti-racism transformation team. We have 7 members who are committed to a 2-year plan to look at different ways on how to tackle this. And I think we have been meeting probably about 2 times a month since February. And we spent a lot of time looking at a lot of different kinds of assessment tools. And I think we got a little, I don't want to say bogged down, but it was just very overwhelming, kind of just to look at all the different areas and all the different assessment tools out there and trying to figure out what would work best. We did invite Paula Cole-Jones to come and speak with our group, and that gave us some different ideas towards assessment as well. We did come up with about a 2-year plan for some fee-based programming that we wanted to do. Some of it included Jubilee. Some of it included continuing with the Beloved programs. We are heavily involved in the Within. I think we've had about 25 to 30 of our congregants go. and we're at about somewhere between 300 and 350 congregants. And we looked at a variety of different programs and what the funding would cost, both with having the congregation pay as well as looking for some funding money. And we submitted a grant for it. We didn't get it funded, but it did help us then also approach our board as to what some of these programs could cost. We also are starting the Decentering Whiteness in Worship videos that we have online. And we're continuing anti-racist and anti-oppression worship services. How to make friends with someone who's different from you, and queer as a verb are two that we recently had. And then we're continuing to work to dismantle oppressive systems, including white supremacy, gender bias, and supporting the LGBTQA community. That's our number one board goal. So this year when our board got together, they chose 3 goals, and that number one is to do this work. We put a book list on our website, and we're really looking at ways we can engage our congregation. We're not meeting in person yet, so it has been a challenge, but what we can do through our website as well. And then we are starting a book group with Widening the Circle, which different committees, including our own and the board, are going to take a chapter and host a book discussion on that. And then we're also looking as far as policy, I think because we got really bogged down on looking at how we could plan to fix the entire congregation and all our committees at once, and these huge assessments. We had a meeting with Suzelle, our minister, and she said, why not just start with one? And so we're looking to tackle our mission statement and looking at that and assessing that. And I think that it feels exciting to actually, instead of being so focused on the planning, to actually just do something. So that's where we're at.
Well, thank you. That is a lot. And Brookfield was on my radar because when you all adopted the 8th principle, I thought there was some real energy and consciousness around how you were integrating that with your social justice work. So thank you very much, Jeannie, for being here. And there will be more to come. All right. And your timing is perfect. So next we have 3 of the larger churches who will share. And these are all in the Washington, D.C. area. I'll take them in this order. River Road with Loretta Garcia, Cedar Lane with Eduardo Hernandez, and All Souls with Neil Manzula. So Loretta, will you go next?
Sure. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I'm the chair of the board trustees of River Road Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are in Bethesda, Maryland, which is a suburb of DC. I'll just do a brief rundown of what we've done for roughly 6-7 years. We re-energized our racial justice task force about 7 years ago, I guess, doing book groups and movies and lots of educational work. And when Michael Brown was shot and killed, we started a Black Lives Matter vigil every Friday night. And that continues to this day. We've done it every Friday night. We sit on a major commuter route. River Road runs from the Beltway, the Capitol Beltway, in toward DC. So we get some amount of traffic, especially on a Friday night. We didn't have vigils during the COVID shutdown, and we've canceled for weather-related things like snow and intense heat. But other than that, it's been every Friday night, so we're very proud of that. We get a lot of honks of support from people going along River Road. We also have, so we've continued with the Racial Justice Task Force doing things like that. We also have a Black Lives Matter banner that sits outside our congregation on the River Road side. And so then 2 years ago, we adopted a racial justice resolution to take more congregational action rather than just the task force. We were trying to involve the congregation in the actions that we took. And then a resolution was brought for the 8th principle at this last 2021 annual meeting. And I did the annual meetings for the last 2 years. So leading up to adoption, we had maybe 4 town halls, 2 town halls, I guess. And then several of us, mostly John Kerner, met with all the small groups in the congregation. So there are men's groups and women's groups and lots of social justice groups. And he met personally with all of them. Other members of the Racial Justice Task Force did as well, but having conversations and engaging the congregation. And we did pass it, not unanimously. We had, I think, maybe 2 or 3% that didn't vote for it. But we did adopt it. And the board has now put into our covenant that we read at the beginning of each meeting, an acknowledgement of the indigenous people and the slave period on the land that we sit on. So we have found through research that 2 indigenous tribes, the Piscataway and the Nacotchtank, were on our land. And we also discovered that a slaveholder, River Road sits on, our land sits on part of a slaveholder's land. So we are trying to figure out now ways that we can acknowledge that. We set up a land acknowledgement task force, that working group, to look at ways we can take specific actions in that regard. And this past June, the board, the congregation received a sizable bequest from a deceased member. And one of the uses for the funds was social justice work. So we carved out a piece of that endowment for specifically 8th principle kinds of work. And we're hoping that we can add a little, as we use some of the funds, we will then add funds back into it. And I don't remember the exact dollar amount. It's somewhere around $10,000, I think. So that's going to help in that regard. And then we're looking at ways to take anti-oppression and anti-racist work forward in the congregation. A lot of that's going to involve, I think, as John did, talking to specific groups. As you heard at the UUA General Assembly, there is some resistance to these kinds of actions. And so I think the way to overcome that is to just have conversation after conversation. The more we can talk about it, the less scary it becomes.
Okay, thank you, Loretta. And we may come back another time to talk about the partnership between River Road, Cedar Lane, and Fairfax. That might be good for another conversation.
Okay, good. The UU partnership.
Yeah, I think all of you kind of urged each other to move forward together on this. That was great.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, we have Cedar Lane, Eduardo.
Buenas noches. Good evening. My name is Eduardo Hernandez. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees, an at-large member of the Board of Trustees at Cedar Lane. I was selected in June, so I just getting started. And unlike my colleague from River Road, oh, and I should say we're also in Bethesda, Maryland, a different part in the suburb, more called Kensington. And unlike the previous speaker, Loretta, I can't really talk about past history of Cedar Lane because I've only been a Unitarian since 2017. Like many of you, I'm a recovering Catholic. How about that? But I can tell you that we started a layperson movement to enact the 8th principle last fall. The leadership of that came out of our beloved Conversations group. It was BIPOC led. That group went to the Board of Trustees in fall and asked to become a task force, a board task force. That was approved in December with the notion of having BIPOC leadership, and the charge was to prepare the congregation for a vote this June. And so between January and June, the task force, board-appointed task force, had a series of what was called salon educational sessions dealing with different racial groups. And in its infinite wisdom, our congregation brought in Paula Cole Jones 2 times. As a matter of fact, Paula, you were there at the beginning of our campaign and right towards the end in May. We had a positive vote in June. Again, just a couple of people. One individual particularly said that he thought enacting the 8th principle was a dogmatic change, which was a new one for me. But hey, after the positive vote, the 8th principle group continued to meet and decided to change its focus towards embodying the 8th principle. We definitely shied away from the word implementing the 8th principle, but embodied is the word that has been used. And so the 8th PEG principle, 8th principle embodiment group, then developed a proposal to continue on the work of embodiment. That proposal went to our Board of Trustees last night and was approved. So the 8th principle group is now the 8th embodiment group, given a year's life by our board with a task to go out and start conducting activities for the 8th principle. That group, I should say, has decided to start work on hospitality issues. That is what that group, not the board, we didn't tell them what to do. The board doesn't do that at Cedar Lane, but they decided that's what they wanted to do. At the same time, the board, and some of you know who are on board, this is like an unpaid part-time job here, you know? So we had a board retreat in July, and the 8th principle was one of our major topics. So we went into a 3-hour retreat, and lo and behold, what are we going to do with the 8th principle was one of the 2 topics. The other topic was leadership. Then we had another retreat with our colleagues, with River Road and with Fairfax, which again, and Loretta is the chair of the board over there. Because actually that group was part of the leadership. Again, we discussed the 8th principle. So we've had 2 board discussions on where do we go with the 8th principle since adopting it in June. We also actually, I must say, I'll take a little credit for leading this. We also decided that we needed to do a deep dive into widening the circle that hadn't been done. And I was concerned that a lot of our congregation wasn't even aware of this. It came out during the pandemic, there wasn't any discussion. So I put together a proposal to do a year-long analysis of the widening the circle, which would be board-led. So no, board doesn't just receive reports from the ministers, the staff, and the ministry teams or the board task force. No, let's get out and lead something. So last night I put a proposal together, which was approved. I presented it to the board last night, approved, to create an 11-person task force to do a deep dive on widening the circle with the idea of coming back with recommendations for action. I have so far 5 board members in that group because it was very important to me that this be board led. We don't just simply want the task force to do it. And I challenged my colleagues. You know, we've had all this great discussion on leadership. Okay, guys, time to be leaders, number one. And number two, I said, there are themes in widening the circle, such as governance, such as accountability, that are, I think, my opinion, more appropriately at the board level than in a task force. So there was some discussion about that. There was like, well, I don't know if we should have two groups or not. And I said, there needs to be parallel processes in which there's a confluence towards the end of this. This is going to take us a deep dive. And I myself had thought, well, let's just look at governance. We're bored. Let's look at governance. Let's look at accountability. And one of our ministers, oh, I must say, we have BIPOC ministers at Cedar Lane. One of our, you know, Abhi Janamanchi, who was a Hindu Universalist, and the minister that's working with us is the Reverend Katie Romano Griffith, who's a multiracial. And she said, no, Eduardo, you got to start off with theology. So with that suggestion, we retitled what we're doing and said, this task force is going to conduct a spiritual journey in looking at the eighth principle. And that changed the focus of things. That changed the outlook, and that changed the discussion when we did that. And Reverend Janamanchi, Paulo, who you know, has always insisted to us that we have to incorporate the spirituality of the eighth principle, or we're not going to make it on that. So I think that our board is really committed. Oh, I must say, also last night, there was a revision of our board priorities. We have a document which was approved in 2020. Yes, it's a 2021 board priorities. We had language presented to us by our actually incoming president to change that to specifically say eighth principle, right? So that came actually out of the task force, and that was presented last night and will probably be approved when we meet again in November. So like I say, this is like a part-time job, not paid.
You sound like you're having a good time.
Well, I'm hopeful.
Yeah. I think you all are giving us some new things to think about. So thank you very much, Eduardo. So there is one congregation whose name I didn't call, and I'd like for them to go next, and then All Souls, and that is Summit Beacon Congregation in Summit, New Jersey. Janet Roberts.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Janet Roberts, and I'm a member. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Of the Board of Trustees at Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Summit. We have about 475 members, and we adopted the eighth principle at our annual meeting in June of 2020. And we are looking to do this work in bite-sized pieces. We're not looking to do everything all at once. It's overwhelming. We see it as a long haul process, and it's not a commitment that has a expiration date or a defined period for the work. Paula asked me to talk about the thing we were doing, so that take a few minutes to take a bit of a deeper look at just one thing that we decided to do, and that is to really start taking a close look at how we recruit leaders in our congregation. Leadership is where a lot of power, and it's the basis of the white power structure in our country. So that seemed like a really important focus for us. So last year when it came time, we had 3 members rotating off our Board of Trustees. Our nominating committee really just said, hey, let us hit pause on what we've been doing here. Let's really take a look at how white power is at play in our process. And for decades, that process has been very opaque at Beacon without a really clearly defined system. We are required by our bylaws to advertise the position. That wasn't necessarily done very effectively. It didn't really result in a very transparent process. And typically what would happen is board themselves or ministers would go around tapping people on the shoulder and persuading them to throw their hats in the and this would go on until we had the number of candidates we needed. I'm getting unstable internet messages here. Can you all still hear me?
Most
Yes, okay.
occasionally it breaks up a little bit.
Yeah, let me
Okay.
ask if people will turn their video cameras off for a few minutes, and let's see if that clears your system, Janet. So just turn your camera off, but don't go anywhere.
Okay, you're
Janet, you
breaking
can
up, so,
continue. Mm.
okay. So we, by virtue of the selection process that we had been using, this kind of go around and beg people to serve system, you know, the people in power, almost always white people, were solidifying their power by hand selecting the candidates for the governing body of the congregation. And this was the process was secretive and accessible and exclusive. So leading up to last year's annual meeting, at which board members are elected by the congregation, the nominating committee worked to reform the process with the goal of honoring the eighth principle. We wanted a process that is transparent, accessible, and inclusive, and one where, you know, the opportunity to serve was known about widely, where people were invited to seek positions on the board. And they also wanted to think, you know, shift our thinking and how we vet the candidates. So I spent a lot of time talking about how to do that and realized that the story we had been telling ourselves was kind of a false story, that no one wants to be on the board, you know, that you have to beg people, you have to cajole people. We shifted this to a new narrative that board leadership is a coveted position. It's a coveted position of power in the congregation, and it's important for the most marginalized members of our congregation to have access to that power. And also our narrative is, you know, board leadership is a fantastic way to serve, and that service is relationship oriented, and it's part of spiritual growth. So it's all this, the whole process was a lot about shifting mindset. We also tried to shift from a mindset of trying to find people who we thought could get things done to one of, you know, what are the board's primary strategic objectives, and then vetting candidates based on the skills that they bring. So a big part of our process now is evaluating candidates on their ability to help us specifically with dismantling racism, because that is our primary objective. It is our number one goal. And so we needed people who had done anti-racism work, who were willing to continue doing anti-racism work, and who were very committed to dismantling racism as part of board leadership. And to be perfectly open, we had members on our board who did not fall into those categories. And it does make it difficult to build momentum and cohesion around this work when everyone isn't kind of starting from a common understanding and a shared, just a shared starting point. We also looked at the overall makeup of the board and vetting candidates. You know, what are the skills already on the board, and what do we need? What skills do we need? And we wanted a good balance of gender identity, LGBTQ, BIPOC, and for white leaders, we wanted people willing to push ahead in dismantling racism. The process worked really well last year. I believe the nominating committee found us 3 very strong board members who are really passionate about this work. It's helping us to push things forward. It was a diverse slate of candidates. And the nominating committee is continuing this work. It has written a letter of accountability it intends to send to the congregation very soon, explaining that it did this work, that it examined our past practices, identified how they were rooted in white supremacy, and has now developed guidelines for changing them. And it is developing guidelines for anti-racist practices and recruiting that it intends to teach our leaders of all groups at Beacon. The board itself is using these practices now. We recently sought members for a team that is overseeing a large building expansion process, and we advertised those positions, and we spent much longer than we normally would have under the old system filling those slots. And it was interesting. We had to remind ourselves during that selection process to have patience. At one point, as we were recruiting for this building expansion team, somebody said, "This is taking too long." And we paused there and we said, how is white power at play in that impatience? And I think that pause allowed the process to unfold in a more transparent way in the time it needed, and it brought fresh faces and talents to the important work that that team is doing. And the last thing I'll say is, I think we have recognized in this process that anti-racist recruiting practices are good for everybody. Yes, we're trying to give people at the margins a seat at the table, but that goal lifts everyone up. And it's also only a first step, because we can see ourselves evolving as we do this work.
Excellent. Well said, Janet. And that is a very important, let's say, aspect of congregational life that now that you all are starting to clarify it, it'll make it more accessible for other congregations. So thank you all for your work. And so now I'd like to introduce Neil Manzullo. I have All Souls on the list last because we really do have a long history of working toward this, and the dismantling racism, the work of inclusion. And Neil is on our board. You're board president right now.
Yep.
Come in now. Hello, good to see you.
Hi.
All right, take it away.
Okay. So like Paul said, I'm the board president at All Souls. Before that, I was the board vice president. And in April of this year, the board adopted dozens of new policies related to the 8th principle. Paula told me I have about 750 words to use, and Paula will not be surprised that I have 753 because I try to just live up to her assignments.
You're good.
I'm not going to go into detail about all of those policies, but I will link to them afterwards so people can have a copy of them. And I'm also going to post my email in the chat if people have questions. So Paula asked for one practice the board has lived out to kind of get us to the adoption of these policies. And I want to mention one policy just so people have in mind a specific policy, and then the practice that got us there. So the specific policy is what I just posted into the chat. The executive team shall not allow staff, particularly staff who are Black and Brown, to lack mentoring and professional development opportunities. Regardless of background, they will provide them with the tools, resources, and support to excel in their positions. So that is one of a couple dozen new policies that we adopted in April. And the practice that got us there, which I want to talk about today, is learning how to do a good job of governing. So that practice isn't terribly sexy, but it's really been important for us. So the 8th principle is all about systemic change, right? And church boards lead church governance, and governance is a system of decision-making. And for us to understand how to implement the 8th principle, we had to understand the larger question of what is our role in this system. And doing so has been a multi-year process that I kind of want to go through. So December 2017, All Souls adopted the 8th principle. And then in the spring of 2018, the board created a group called the Transformation Team, which Paula co-led for a while. That group represented various communities within All Souls, and I was the Young Souls representative on that committee. And the team focused on a few areas of the church to make 8th principle focused recommendations. And one of those areas was governance recommendations. So how can All Souls govern itself better? Looking back at a lot of our recommendations, the intent and ideas behind them were very good. But I think what could have been improved was having a stronger linkage to the board. So the transformation team didn't have a specific board person on its governance subcommittee. And so we had a lot of good ideas for governance, but we weren't tied into like how All Souls makes decisions. So then the next year, the board created a more specific group that was focused on governance called the Governance Task Force. This had about 8 or 10 governance experts at the church. And I think Barbara Corprew, who is on this phone call too, was also on that group. And so the specific task of this group was like, okay, use your governance expertise, look at the transformation team recommendations, look at other recommendations, and make some specific recommendations for how the board can improve how it makes decisions. And what this task force did was learn how we're supposed to make decisions and then train board members on how we're supposed to make decisions. And it was that training, which honestly took about a year of reading through books like Governance and Ministry by Reverend Dan Hotchkiss, which was quite good, reading through other governance books, looking at other governance systems at other churches. It was that year of learning that allowed us to, this past year, write and then adopt a bunch of new 8th principle focused policies. So the task force spent a year learning. And then last fall, the task force moved into the process of actually writing new policies. And that seems like a long time, right? A year of just like learning how are you supposed to make decisions, but we really needed it. Like we're a large, complicated church, and making decisions is complicated in that type of church. And like we needed a year of learning how to make decisions. So then last fall, Barbara and I moved into writing these new 8th principle policies. And the way we did so was through a process that was designed to be really transparent and get lots and lots of buy-in. And that process is kind of outlined in Governance and Ministry by Dan Hotchkiss, which is a great book. So how did we come up with these 8th principle policies? So first we looked at other churches that have anti-racism policies. So Annapolis, Unity Unitarian have some good policies. Then Barbara found that a lot of food co-ops actually have really good anti-racism policies and have similar governance systems to big churches. We also talked about widening the circle, and the entire board read that and then discussed it one chapter per board meeting. We talked with current and former Black staff members about their experience at All Souls. And then the task force took all of that information and drafted a set of policies, got the board's green light to share it around the church. And then we started publicizing like, hey, we have some draft policies related to the 8th principle. So we posted about them in the weekly bulletin. We talked about them with our church council. We offered to meet with literally any community in the church that wanted to talk about governance policies. Now, the number of communities that wanted to talk about governance policies was quite low, but that's fine. Like the people who are interested come to that table to talk about 8th principle policies, and we got good feedback. So then we incorporated all that feedback. We discussed it again with the governance task force, and the board approved it in April. And so that process was basically a year of learning how is it that a board should make decisions, and then a year of applying that to writing 8th principle focused policies in a super open and transparent fashion. So the one policy that I posted in the chat, that's really the product of 2 or 3 years of work. And it's just a sentence long, but it's the result of like really thinking deeply about what does widening the circle say? How should decisions be made? Who should be making decisions? What is the board's role in this? And so at least at All Souls, a really key thing in writing eighth principle policies has been a broader system of just learning. Like, what is a board's job? And it's that learning that has been, I think, the key for us. So that was my 750 words. I'm going to post a link to all of the policies in the chat. So if you go to this page, there's a tab called Governance and the Eighth Principle. And there's two documents. One is a summary of our process and a summary of kind of the why behind all of these policies. So like the policy I posted into the chat. And then there is a document that is all of our governance policies with all of the changes highlighted. And those are changes to things related to staff treatment, to things related to monitoring how well the eighth principle is being implemented in the church, things related to how the board makes its decisions. So that is my 750. Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome. I'd like for Barbara to introduce herself as well. And let me say, I am looking towards a session where we can have the whole evening be All Souls, because we took this on in a lot of different dimensions. And I think that the policies that you all came up with, I have to tell the truth, they knocked my socks off, although I haven't been wearing socks with COVID, but they really did knock my socks off. You know, it's like, how do we move from policy governance to something that really sounds workable? And once I saw the document that you all created, I'm like, oh, great. Let's see what this yields, because it's like nothing I've ever seen. So many of the things that are written for church systems, like healthy congregations and those kinds of work, they write so generically that I'm clear they're not designed for multiculturalism. And this is a set of board policies or church policies that literally is designed now for multiculturalism. So Barbara, will you say something so that we can appreciate your work?
Corprew, and like Neil said, there's a lot out there that was already there in the area of food co-ops and in school boards all around the country. And I should say that, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, all universities, all organizations, museums have implemented policies that are out there for you to review. And some of them are very, very advanced and tight. And you can pull from them and learn from them and use them. The one that Neil put in the chat is really significant because it comes out of concern that was in widening the circle, because there was a chapter on Black professional staff. And one of the failures was that there was not appropriate mentoring for the staff so that they could succeed. And so this was a significant effort on our part to try and correct that, because we've seen it in our own church.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure that we plugged that hole and made sure it was a value, and that it did not matter whether the minister was a new minister or someone who had been ministering for a while. And it did not matter whether the person was an administrator or whether the person was a minister. So again, as Neil said, it took a while and it was a lot of wordsmithing, but we tried to be clear and we tried to identify values that were important to us that come out of the eighth principle without repeating the eighth principle.
Great. And just on a personal note, Barbara and I both grew up in All Souls Church, right? So we're lifelong Unitarian.
Yeah, I
Universal.
joined in 1958.
Well, you were ahead of me by a little, and we went to church with our mothers, just to give you a sense of the depth. So anyway, thank you, Neil and Barbara, for the leadership that you've given to our church, and also what you have shared, and I'm sure will continue to share with this community. So there we have it. We have it recorded. The beginning of a conversation that just very well might be a turning point for those who are looking to adopt the 8th principle this year and the years to come. There's something that I like to refer to as new generations. And it comes from doing this work with a lot of different congregations. So let's take, for example, a resolution. You know, some of the earlier resolutions, which were well done and didn't quite hit the nail on the head, but as congregations looked at those examples, there was one case where I got to kind of intervene. It's like, well, don't just pick it up as it is, let's revise it. And so they came up with a great example. And then others will look at that and come up with improvements. So we are really on a fast track. It may not feel like it, but we are on a pretty fast track around institutional and systemic change. So I want to say stay tuned and watch and listen and keep sharing. Yeah. So we have a few minutes for comments or questions. And let's say if you raise your hand, you know, we'll bring you in. Jill?
Hi again. Yeah, when I was talking earlier, I just talked about our work on the widening the circle. I was trying to be careful to stay with one subject, but there's something that people might be helpful to people that we worked on that hasn't been mentioned. It has to do with Jubilee. Because of the 8th principle and the commitment to that, we've worked more on regarding Jubilee. So we've upped our scholarship budget by a lot for that. And since adopting the 8th principle, most of our board members have participated in Jubilee, the anti-racism training, and also at least one time. And some of the worship team and most other team and task force member leaders have done it as well. So a lot more people have done Jubilee because of the 8th principle adoption. And also the board has supported several 8th principle task force initiatives to provide funds for leaders of color to attend General Assembly and Blue gathering. And we do a share the plate with Blue every year. So those are some tangible things we've done because of the 8th principle that others might want to look into. Also, we have a philosophy that the beloved community goes beyond our church borders, our church boundaries. And so I think because of the 8th principle, several people on our board and congregation have gotten involved with, for instance, attending the Honolulu Police Commission meetings on Wednesdays and testifying. For instance, right now they're looking for a new police chief, one that has a moral compass. And so people from our church are testifying to give their input on that. And I think spurred on by the 8th principle to reach out to the wider community. And also there are people working on fighting against cash bail, like combining with other justice groups in the community and fighting against cash bail, and also fighting against building a new prison in Hawaii. So those are some things we've done beyond our border, our church boundaries in the wider community. And we feel that that's been inspired by the 8th principle.
Great,
So,
thank you. Thanks, Jill, for sharing that. I'm glad you mentioned Jubilee because I think also at All Souls, Neil, didn't you all make a requirement that board members need to have Jubilee or something comparable?
Yeah,
Neil?
there's a new requirement that board members take anti-racism, anti-oppression training.
Yes, good. And for all of you on the call, we have a Jubilee coming up November 12th through the 14th. Registration is on the Central East Region website. Someone might be able to drop the link in the chat here. And it's a way for you to build capacity in your congregation so people can, register themselves. And if you continue to do that, you'll have a pretty strong group of advocates in your congregation. I want to say about Jubilee. In 1999, I started using Jubilee as our strategy at All Souls. And the key there is, can we get a critical mass of people who all share the same analysis? And if we do, will the church behave differently? We did Jubilee every single year since 1999. And many years we were doing 2 a year. So I want to put that out there because the church doesn't just get there without preparation, without laying groundwork. And I encourage you all to use that resource that is available so that we can keep it available. So thanks, Jill, for bringing Jubilee up. I see Steve with his hand up.
Thanks, Paula. And thanks to all the board members who shared your best practices. This has been very inspiring. Question, what programs, what consultants are available? Who can you recommend, or what can you recommend for boards who may be more into managing traditionally in a given congregation than leading, and are kind of reluctant to step out and do some of the things that we've heard about here this evening?
Good question. The people who spoke, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, we've used Unity Consulting, which is associated with Unity Unitarian. And we're currently using them on a project to update church goals. And they've been quite helpful for helping us learn how to make decisions.
Do they have a strong anti-racist and anti-oppression analysis?
The lead person there, Laura Park, is a trained intercultural development inventory trainer. I don't know what other skills she has.
Okay, good, thank you. Neil, anyone else have recommendations of people that you have found? Okay. All right, so we are kind of in new territory, but we can look around and see what we can learn about people who might be able to come in and work with boards. Blue is doing some really good work, and they bring outside consultants in for their work. They have someone that is new coming in right now. So I'll check in with Blue to see what recommendations they have, and we'll just continue to try to identify those resources for you. Thank you. That was a good question.
I apologize. One of the
Okay, Mel.
some of you may know, Crossroads Ministry is actually around the country doing a lot of things online, as well as right now. Crossroads has actually launched a lot of our efforts way back when, and has updated. It's got probably the most comprehensive intersectionality analysis out there. And it really, even though we walked away from some of the things from the early days, we were supposed to be the lead faith group. But things have continued to grow, and the work has grown. And actually, I think there may be a readiness in some of our congregations to be able to take advantage of. I know they've got some coming up soon, but checking their website, you can again get on those with different from around the country. Just as and they've got a really couple dealing with whiteness, white allyship, and right now, as well as the comprehensive anti-racism framework. Workshops are coming up in November. I just saw it yesterday myself. So
Thanks, Mel. We will definitely look at that because Crossroads did get our association on this path. Yes, for sure. Thank you. Joe and then Jim Armstrong, and that'll may bring us to a close.
Thanks, Paula. I had a follow-up question to the gentleman. I believe it was Mr. Marzullo from All Souls talked about making anti-racism work a mandatory requirement for the board. I was wondering if you could just spend a minute describing how the congregation went about doing it. Did it take a board vote, or could you just expand a little bit more on how you were able to pull that off and make it a mandatory requirement?
Sure. Although my answer might be unsatisfying because this is a policy we adopted in April. So there was already a requirement that new board members be oriented on governance, and we expanded that to be oriented also on the 8th principle. And we also included a provision that says that the board should spend its money, the board gets an allocation of money on anti-oppression training. So now the board has money that is supposed to be used for that kind of training, and there's a mandate that new board members receive 8th principle focused orientation.
I love the orientation angle. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Great, good, thank you. Jim Armstrong.
Yeah, I just take a minute. Mel Hoover, thank you so much for bringing up Crossroads. They did change their name a while back. I saw somebody posted the link in the chat. It's now Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training rather than Ministries. Yep.
Yeah, it's a good one. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Good. Well, I would like for us to take a couple of minutes to put your appreciation in the chat. This is our real-time thank you note. If you were inspired, if you learned something here tonight, drop your comments and appreciation in the chat so that the people who are giving their experience and their time can take that home with them.
It's interesting. One thing we didn't mention is moving away from Robert's Rules of Order for how we run meetings. And I think that's happening a lot in the last couple of years, especially with 8th principle.
Good. So let's not go deep into that tonight. We can end on a good note. You start talking about Robert's Rules of Order and my mood changes. So thank you. Definitely something for us to revisit. Ways of making group decisions. And
yeah, I like it that way better. Not Robert's rules.
Yeah.
I was never any good at them anyway.
Say that again, Chris.
I said I was never any good at them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they may have a role, but it certainly needs to be re-examined, right? like a number of other things we overuse them.
I was a nonprofit lawyer for my whole career, 30 or 40 years, and I constantly advised all of my clients, virtually all of my clients, not to use Robert Rule of Order.
Oh, well, it sounds like you may have some alternatives. We might want to hear some of those. Put your name and put your email in the chat for us, Cindy. By the way, if anyone is here who does not receive direct emails from us, please put your email and your congregation in the chat and we will add you to the list. We have a Facebook page that is pretty active and we post our meetings and other things there. So we'll try to get you connected if you're not. If you are interested in a Jubilee training, also drop your name, your email in the chat and indicate that so we can try to link you in or come back to you if you're hoping to host one. So, okay, 2 minutes to closing. Bruce well, first I want to thank you all, always, for building this robust community. This is, it's a thrill. It's a thrill to be a part of this, the highlight of my month each month. And Bruce is going to close us out. You can read the same reading you read. That was a good one. I want to hear it a second time. I saw that look on your face. But if you want to also say some parting words, Bruce, this is your turn.
All right, thank you, Paula. Let me read it again because I think that was a good one. And we have a poet at our church who always reads her poems 2 times, and I really appreciate the chance to hear things a second time. From James Cone. Indeed, our survival and liberation depend upon our recognition of the truth when it is spoken and lived by the people. If we cannot recognize the truth, then it cannot liberate us from untruth. To know the truth is to appropriate, for it is not mainly reflection and theory. Truth is divine action entering our lives and creating the human action of liberation.
Thank you, Bruce.
And as others have said, I think maintaining the connection to the spiritual dimension of what we're doing is really crucial to its sustainability and its power. And I think that's one of the differences that the 8th principle, by putting that together with the rest, is probably one of the most important aspects of why this is taking off like it has been.
Yeah. And I think that spiritual connection is critical because this is also about an identity change. We are changing ourselves, the way that we understand Unitarian Universalism, the way that other people will see us. And so thanks for that, Bruce. And I don't know, this is just a good place to end. Oh, wait a minute, before you go, this month is our 2nd anniversary. We should have celebrated. The learning community was started in October of, what would that make it, 2019?
2019.
Yeah, so we're 2 years old now, exactly, you all. Yay!
Happy birthday.
Applause for everyone.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks everyone. Take care, and we will see you on the 2nd Wednesday of November. I think we're going to have a special treat for you, but we won't announce it just yet. That's what, November 10th, Bruce?
Right.
And the 2nd Wednesday of December. Same time, same place. All right? Take care, everyone.
Paul, at some point, I'd love for us to get a few minutes. Some point.
Okay, good.
Let me know what works for you.
Send me a text, Mel. Maybe we can catch up by phone tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Thursday or Friday for sure. Okay?
Let's do it.
All right. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Great job, Paula. My compliments.
Oh, you're welcome. Great job to you all. My technical problems, I have to figure that out, but you all did a wonderful job. It's exciting to get to this point. Bruce and I have been patient, right? We didn't want to move it too fast. And now we're here, but we've got to go back and create space for new people coming in as well.
Never ends.
The challenge and opportunity of growth.
That's right. That's right, but we can handle it.
Oh, absolutely. You got to do it. You got to do it. All right.
Yeah.
We're with
Love and
you.
peace.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We're with you.
All right. I wonder if the problem is around memory. I don't know why, but this one worked okay.
Should I stop the recording?
Oh yes, thank you. This